Hey everybody, I'm going to walk through the 2018 Real Food Campaign final report. There's a lot in there and I thought a small walkthrough would be helpful. We're mostly going to talk about the data, but I'll do a little bit about the top level stuff too. Sorry, I'm just in the lab. It's a little loud and you'll hear people walk through sometimes, so let's get started. So the final report, a lot of the analysis was done by Christian Omland and Dan Taravist. There was a whole pile of people who collected the data, BFA members, chapter leaders, and others. BFA supported the work along with their donor network, and there's a lot of technical support from Dan and Dave and Jill, and then I'm the one who kind of put everything together. So the Real Food Campaign Lab 2018 survey consisted of samples being sent to our lab in Michigan over the course of about 6 months from 7 different states, and in total we collected from about 50 unique stores and 68 farms and gardens. We had almost 650 samples of carrots, 181 samples of spinach, and from the places where we sampled from farms, we also collected, in addition to the carrot or spinach sample, soil samples right next to the carrot or the spinach, 177 of those. If you don't want to listen to this whole video, you could stop right now after I tell you the top level stuff. So here's basically what we found. We found there was a lot of variation in antioxidants, polyphenols, and minerals in carrots and spinach from all kinds of sources. So as much as 200 to 1 variation. So some sample would have a value of 1 and some sample would have value of 200 in terms of antioxidants. So that's a lot. So a carrot is not a carrot is not a carrot. They are different. There was also a lot of that variation was due to brands or farms. So if I took the same sample from one farm, a bunch of samples from one farm and a bunch of samples from another farm, they would be noticeably different. Same is true with brands. But that was not really true for the simple farm management questions we asked in the survey, which was like, are you till or no-till, organic or not organic? Maybe because we didn't have enough data, or the data wasn't high quality enough. But anyway, we couldn't figure out difference between farm management. But there definitely was differences due to brands and farms, which likely came from varietal differences or differences from when the sample was collected in the plant's life cycle. And then finally, the question is, can we use spectral data using the bionutrient meter to predict those nutritional measures, polyphenols and antioxidants specifically, by building a model? The answer is, yeah, actually we can in a fairly simple way. So we can predict polyphenols and antioxidants in carrots, a high sample, so greater than 50th percentile versus a low sample, between 73 to 86% of the time. That was using the supernate, so that was using like an extract. If we just did it on the surface scan, we got about 10% lower quality, which is not that good, because 50-50 is just a crapshoot, right? So definitely the extract reflectance was better than the surface scan because surface scan is noisier. But it was interesting also to note it was the UV LEDs that seemed to be most predictive, which was a bit of a surprise. So that's the top level summary. Now I'm going to go into the details. So you can look through the background of the RFC. Here's basically what we did. We designed a survey to collect all this data. We got 7 collaborators on board to collect it with us. We actually created a lab, outfitted the lab to find a sampling and testing process. We also created our own internal data management system, which I'll use a little bit here. We built and measured all the samples on the bionutrient meter, and then here's the total number. So that's basically what we did. You can look at the methods, the basic survey method here. But we did have a lot of loss. This is our first year, so we learned things about shipping and samples rotting and other types of stuff. We also learned things about making sure we had consistent data types, so that if you put in Sam's farm, you didn't put it in 8 different ways, that makes it really hard for us to analyze the data. So we definitely learned some things there. So let's walk through a description of what kind of variation we found. This is really critical. If you want to look at the data, this is where you should go. This first link here is going to, let me see here. Sorry, I thought I had that up. No, it's open. So this first link is really the main place you should go if you want to look at the data. It takes a minute to load. All these take a minute to load because they're downloading all of the data and then they're doing a bunch of filtering. So please be patient when you click on these links. There's a bunch more links here too, which I'll show you just 1 or 2 examples, but I think it's really worth looking through them. I think they're really interesting. So here's the main survey link. That's this top one here. If you're looking for data, you should go there. So it shows you where the data was collected from, 96 samples from Iowa, 184 from Michigan, 111 from New York. It shows you when they were collected, so the dates that the samples were submitted, or at least when we processed them in the lab. This is really the key download link. If you're looking for cleaned data ready for analysis, this is what you want. Clean, useful variables. You can download it as a CSV. If you also download variable names and descriptions, that will tell you what each of the variables you find in here is and what it means. So please use those for your own personal analysis. Otherwise, you can just walk through what the kind of analysis we've provided for you. Here's the info about each sample. We tried to roughly categorize samples according to their management practice, biological meaning more regenerative, and also by some other factors, like if they were collected from a farm or a store. Here's some more, again, same links here as you would find in the report, just some other detailed links about minerals, because there's so many minerals. They were hard to display all here, so I put them in separate dashboards. So here's the first thing that you'll notice. There's just a lot of variation in the samples. So this is soil respiration, which is a rough measure of biological activity in soils in the top 6 inches, 15 centimeters. There's a lot of variability. There's some soils with very little respiration, some with a lot. Same with organic carbon. Almost certainly there's a lot of heavily amended soils here, possibly with potting mixes or other things in them. It's hard to get mineral soils to 10% carbon. Just scrolling down, you see the same for polyphenols. So polyphenols in carrots, or antioxidants in carrots, can go from basically 0 to 250. So that's a huge amount of variation. Spinach, same thing. You have polyphenols going from 5, or 0 to 10 to almost 100. Again, a huge amount of variation. Antioxidants, same thing in spinach, going from almost 0 to about 1,000. So a lot of variation. So what about by farm practice? So the no bio are like conventional samples. The lots of bio would be regenerative samples where people said that they were no-till, where people said that they used biological amendments, they had non-chlorinated water. You can see the list of items that were defined as lots of bio there, but basically those are things that typically would be considered regenerative. We don't see meaningful differences here. Basically all the samples, plus or minus, had the same average amount of antioxidants, polyphenols, and proteins, just looking at these big groups. Minerals was roughly the same. There were some differences. Some of these may have been significant, technically significant, but I don't think they're dramatically meaningful. This one was kind of high. The farm samples had really high iron. I'm not sure if that's meaningful or not, but that was about the only thing that really stood out, but not huge differences here. You can also look at soil carbon differences. Even soil carbon was not dramatically different. We didn't have this, are you organic but not certified versus organic and certified. There does seem to be a big difference there. That's probably due to mineral soils versus like smaller scale farmers who are amending heavily with compost or potentially potting mixes and things like that. Don't really know, but there is a pretty big difference there. Not sure how meaningful that is. Same thing, this is soil respiration, so rough estimate of biological activity. Not big differences here either between regenerative, non-regenerative. So let's just see if we can map total organic carbon, so carbon content in the soil by antioxidants. If there was a relationship, you would kind of see the trend line go like this, but there's really not. It's pretty much a mess. You see the same thing with soil respiration, so this is biological activity, kind of a mess. Polyphenols, same thing, no clear relationships there. This was sort of a sanity check graph to say, hey, well, we know that antioxidants and polyphenols overlap. A lot of polyphenolic compounds are also antioxidants, so they should kind of relate, which they do, certainly not perfectly, but basically as one goes up, the other goes up. We also kind of see that more soil respiration correlates with more total carbon in the soil. So as this goes up, this roughly goes up, with a couple of outliers here, but same idea, but now this is in the 6 to 12 inch or 15 to 30 centimeter samples. And then finally at the bottom here we have all the spectral scans, so you can see the surface scans for carrots and then the carrot extract scans, and then you can also see the soil scans using the bionutrient meter. That's for estimating soil carbon. This is for estimating antioxidants and polyphenols. So that's that. Here's just some different ways of looking at that same data, which I think is a lot of this kind of says the same thing. So this shows differences between store and farm samples for carrots and spinach, summarizing it by group. It also adds some estimates for how much noise our lab process adds. In some cases we know, in some cases we don't. That's some work we have to do. And then just trying to understand roughly where is the variation coming from. So let's just focus on this for a minute. These are all a couple of the elements: phosphorus, sulfur, chlorine, potassium. We can explain a lot of the variation, a lot of that noise that you saw before, from differences in brand and or when they were sampled. So in the case of phosphorus, brand or sampling accounts for roughly 40% of the variation. There's lots of ways to measure variation. I'm just measuring it one way, but hopefully this gives you a sense. So a good portion of it is brand or time sampled, and that's true really across the board. Carrots, same kind of a thing. Between 30 and 50% of the variation can be explained by the producer in the case of coming from a farm. So yeah, but there's still a lot of variation that's kind of unknown. And even if you take the same 3 carrots from the same location, you still find some variation. So we have to sort of nail that down. But a lot of variation comes from the brand or the time sampled and the producer and the time sampled. So let's go back. So let's take a look at this. I think this is an interesting one. So here we pulled out samples where we had more than 3 samples from the same location at the same time. So this would be like 5 samples from Washtenaw County, from Bolthouse Farms, which is sort of a major brand, collected at the same date. So 5 samples basically from the same bag. And here is more than 3 or more samples collected from the same farm on the same date. So you can see Lenawee County, here, let's take this one. Danver variety carrots collected in Jefferson County at 2 different dates, each with a couple of samples so that we can estimate standard deviation. Same thing here, 2 varieties collected in Fairfield County from the same farm on 2 different dates. Here's another one from Fairfield on 2 different dates. Here's from Washtenaw County on 2 different dates. So you can kind of look and say, well, what do we notice? These are in 2 different counties, but they're very close by. You see pretty big differences, and they're both from the same store and the same brand. Pretty big differences in polyphenols and antioxidants. Same here. This is even Kern Ridge Growers. It's literally the same producer, 2 different dates, and you see very big differences in antioxidants. I like this one. This shows a deep purple carrot variety from Johnny's from the same farm, collected at the same day as a white carrot, this Jean du Daubs, I don't know how to pronounce it. And you can see those 2 varietals have huge differences in antioxidants and polyphenols. So I think that's kind of interesting as well. So there's definitely differences even collected on the same date. So let's back out and do the same kind of analysis but with minerals. So here's our roughly the same set of farms. So same farm, same location, 2 different dates, or same store, same location, 2 different dates, and again the same with the farms. So big differences in certain things like phosphorus. 2 samples from the same farm on 2 different dates can have really big differences in chlorine, sulfur, phosphorus, potassium, calcium. Same here with Kern Ridge. Same here from the same grower on 2 different dates, even the same variety of Danver. They can have very different potassium and calcium and chlorine levels. Same here with Hartford. So I think that's quite interesting. Some of these are very consistent. Like if you look at nickel averages across everything, very little difference, right? I mean, the biggest difference is this 10.6, which must have an outlier in it because it has a large standard deviation, versus the lowest, being maybe 5.6. Whereas so that's maybe, the lowest is only half as big as the biggest group. Whereas if you look at, I think potassium has the biggest, or phosphorus has the biggest differential. What was it? Yeah, potassium. So here, your lowest sample has 7,400 parts per million potassium, whereas the highest sample has almost 100,000. That's more than 10 times the lowest sample. So it's interesting to note that potassium variation in the final carrot, is 10 to 1 from lowest to highest, whereas nickel is 2 to 1, or copper is even lower than that. Iron is another one with lots of variation. Very, very low iron samples, 14.1 from Grimway Farms in Hartford, versus a sample that has 262 parts per million of iron from Earthbound Farm in Westchester. Those, they're not geographically that far apart. So you see some big outliers. Here's another one, Lenawee County, 379 parts per million of iron. So it's interesting. I guess what I want to note here is there's variation even between the same farm and different dates, like chlorine and potassium at Grimway Farms. There's big variation obviously between different farms also. Some types of minerals have a huge amount of variation, up 10 to 1 or more, like iron and potassium. And some minerals have very little variation, like nickel, copper. So yeah, I think that's interesting stuff. So I just wanted to show this because one could ask, well, are you really accurately collecting this minerals data? How are you doing it? We're using a tool called XRF, X-ray fluorescence. The absolute value for XRF can be off because it's a calibrated tool to a standard. So you'll see, for example, in our, I didn't put it up here, but if you download the data, the sodium numbers can oftentimes be negative because the entire estimate of sodium is shifted lower. So you'll see they're relative to each other, they're reasonable, but relative to an absolute standard, they're shifted low. So you'll see a lot of negative numbers. But it's useful here as a sanity check to say, well, we should at least, if it's low noise measurement, we should at least see the 6 to 12 inch copper. So when we took a sample of 0 to 6 inch in a soil and 6 to 12 inch in a soil, they should relate pretty clearly, right, from the exact same soil. So that's what we're seeing here. So this dot is saying at 0 to 6 inches, copper was 80 parts per million, and at 6 to 12 inches, the copper levels in that same soil was just below 80 parts per million. So this kind of suggests that, you know, our XRF is working. We're not totally crazy. And you see that really across all the minerals. This is soil respiration. I think I showed that before, antioxidants. So, but yeah, basically we get some confirmation that the methods that we're using are reasonable, producing results that we kind of expect. We already went through all this. I did want to show one other thing that I would love for people to pick through, besides the stuff that I already showed. Let me find it here. It might take a second to load, so I might pause for a second while it loads. Okay, so yeah, that took a little bit. But I think this is one of the most interesting additional dashboards that we provide, and there's a link in that the main dashboard that has the download link and everything in it. So this is just looking at how much aluminum was there in the food sample, so a carrot sample, compared to magnesium in that same carrot sample. So just looking at two different minerals in food, and how do those two minerals correlate. And this is, I believe, carrots and spinach both combined. So you can see there's kind of a relationship, kind of rough for some of these. Sulfur and magnesium kind of tend to relate. So again, if there was, every time there was one sulfur, there was one magnesium, it would be a perfect line from 0 up, you know. This is interesting that it's kind of, it goes in the opposite direction. So most of these tended to go up. This one seems like when there's more nickel, there's actually less magnesium. Whereas this one says when there's more copper, there's more magnesium in the carrot sample. So let's go look for, so there's some in here that are quite striking and make sense. So silicon in the food by aluminum in the food. Well, I think aluminum's typical form in soil is aluminum silicate. And so you see a really clear relationship between silicon in the food and aluminum in the food, which I think makes some sense. I would love someone to fact check me on that. Sulfur and aluminum, also somewhat of a positive relationship. Here's another one, potassium and aluminum. Very clear positive relationship. Calcium and aluminum, another clear positive relationship. This one's interesting. Manganese and aluminum. More inversely related here. And actually, I think what you'll see as we go down, so potassium and silicon. So silicon seems to have very clear relationships with certain minerals, but I wanted to show. So here's sulfur, seemed like a particularly interesting one. So here's sulfur and phosphorus. So positive relationship, kind of an odd looking curve. Sulfur, calcium, calcium and sulfur, potassium and sulfur, nickel and sulfur, negative relationship, kind of like what we saw. So it's worth just taking a look at these. Calcium and potassium, they're clearly related. Calcium seems like an interesting one too. It seems to relate to other things. So here's another one. So manganese, kind of inversely related to potassium. Manganese seems like it's, as manganese go up, other things actually go down. Manganese and calcium. Similarly, as manganese goes up, calcium actually goes down, and vice versa. Iron and manganese seems positively related. These are just mush. There's no real relationship there. These are lead and arsenic, which are in very small quantities in some foods. Nickel and iron seem somewhat inversely related, not pretty loosely. Zinc and iron seem positively related. Selenium and iron also positively related. Here's an interesting one. Copper and nickel. Really strong negative relationship. More copper, less nickel. More nickel, less copper. Anything else in here? That's kind of interesting. Lead and arsenic? Yeah. They must be found in either similar compounds or similar reasons why you would have high lead or arsenic. There wasn't very many high lead samples. There was only a few. And they may honestly just be outliers. It's hard to know. So that's it. So I just find this really interesting because there's clear relationships here that probably relate to the types of compounds that are forming and are found in food, like aluminum silicate or other compounds. I'm really not an expert. I just like this. I would love to get some feedback on the forums. Where is it? Here we go. Nope. This is how I feel being done. Shoot. Where were we? If you want to see more of the data or anything, also you can go get anonymized data by farm. Oops, need to fix that, sorry. But if you click on this, I'm going to close this because it's so here was that link. I'm going to show you again where you can get to it from. Go to lab.realfoodcampaign.org and go to results. Get 2018 survey data by farm. That'll actually take you to this, and you'll get an anonymized farm name from the person that collected your sample. If you're a farm that participated and contributed samples, you can put in that name, and then if you had any samples, like in this case he had 2 spinach samples, they're here, and you can see your samples compared to averages. Some of the samples, again, the data wasn't there, or the sample rotted, especially if they were early in the season or whatever, but it will be there as much as it can be. So, okay, so let's finish up this final report. So I just like that the minerals relationship. That was an interesting one. So, okay, so this last part is predicting nutritional content. So what we do here is we actually build a model. So we take part of the data and we build a model, and then that's called training the model. And you have to have both the lab outputs that you're trying to predict, like antioxidants and polyphenols, as well as the things you're using to predict them. So that would be metadata about the sample and our spectra from the bionutrient meter. So you build a model, and then you test that model by taking some data that you didn't show the model and running it through and seeing if it gets the right answer. So, one model that we used, model type was called random forest. And I know this is a lot of numbers, but really this is the stuff you want to focus on here. So for antioxidants, how often did we correctly guess if this was a high antioxidant carrot or a low antioxidant carrot? These were 3 different models that we ran, one with only reflectance data, one with reflectance data and the metadata, so like, what was the diameter of the carrot, what was the color of the carrot, information like that. We have a list of the metadata up here. And then an optimized version where only the really relevant variables were kept in the model to try to avoid overfitting and get better results. So if you just scan the surface of the carrot, now we did have to shave the surface flat because the surface needs to be flat, but it is just the carrot surface shaved flat. we could correctly identify a carrot 61% of the time, either as being high or low on average. So that's not that great. 50% is random chance, so that's only a little above random chance. If we took the supernatant, which is if you take the carrot and shred it, you mix it with methanol and water and mix it around for a while, the liquid part that remains, basically it's like methanol and water that absorbed all the carrot juices. That's the carrot supernatant. So if you measure that, you get a much better answer, about 10 points higher. So 73% of the time you correctly pick you correctly identify the carrot as being high antioxidant or low antioxidant. We do the same thing with polyphenols. 64% for the carrot surface correctly identified, 76% for the supernatant correctly identified. That's definitely better than random chance. We did go back and say, oh, what if we build a model with just metadata? Didn't work. It was about 50%. So this is real. There is some prediction coming from the scan, and it's meaningful. There's very little protein in carrots and spinach, so actually it kind of made sense that the protein numbers were basically meaningless. They should be about meaningless. So let's look at the same thing for spinach. Spinach had many fewer samples, only about 100 to 140 samples. We were able to much better predict both the surface scan for spinach, for polyphenols and antioxidants, as well as that supernatant scan, so that extract scan. However, we had some items in there that were not really technically spinach. They were mustard varieties or other oddball things. So when we took them out, we actually found that our prediction level went down a little bit, more sort of in the range of what carrots was. So 78% and 74% for antioxidants and polyphenols for the supernatant, and about 57 and 68 for the surface scan for spinach. So we'll have to see in the future. Again, this was the spinach data. We had about a third to a quarter as many samples as we had for the carrots. And that's really the next point I want to make really quickly is, how many samples do you need to make these models? This is really important. So in general with these models, the more samples the better, because the more samples you have, the more accurately the model can figure out which variables it needs to do a good job of predicting. I'm not really speaking in statistical terms here, but that's the basic idea. So what we did is we said, well, we could only train the model on 320 samples max, because we only had about 450 or 500. So, but we did want to see if we trained it on fewer, was the model the same or worse? Because if it's worse and it gets better as we have more samples, that's an indication that if we had even more samples, it would continue to get better, at least to a point. And basically what we found was, yeah, between using 107 samples to train the model and 320 samples to train the model, our model fit got better. And you can kind of see that here. Basically, a perfect model fit would go along this line. So you can see our model fit is getting a little bit better and better, both for surface scans and also for the supernatant scans, which is this set. This is just showing the same thing. It's a little hard to understand, but R squared is a model fit. So how good is the model by the number of samples that we trained on. So you can see, for example, for supernatant, as we train on more samples of 100, 200, 300, 400, the model fit is getting better and better. So we could imagine if we had 600 or 700, it would continue to go up. All of these will eventually tail off, and we don't know where that tail is. Maybe it would tail right here at 400, maybe it would tail up at 1,000, we would end up with a much better fit. We don't know, but next year we're definitely going to collect a lot more samples to see if more samples help improve that model fit so we can get better predictions. We also ran similar models using linear regression, and we got similar numbers. So 63% prediction for surface scans using carrots, compared to 62% using the other model. So you can kind of see that we got similar numbers using this. This was important because you can overfit models using things like random forest and regression, but using a couple of different models and having help from a statistician, which we did, we were able to some reasonable degree, be self-aware of model overfitting and tricking ourselves into thinking that we were seeing something that we didn't. So here again, carrots using supernatant rather than the surface scan. The regression model was accurate sort of 74% of the time, whereas the random forest model was 72 to 73. So they're getting roughly similar answers. So what did we learn this year? And then we'll wrap up this. So we learned a lot. We learned that, as we showed with the increase in R squared with an increase in sample numbers, if we want to improve our model fits, we do need more data, or at least to a certain extent more data will help. We don't know how much more, but it will help. We also need better data quality. We saw a lot of noise, a lot of variability, especially in polyphenols and antioxidants that could have come from the lab. And we are working on identifying that and trying to nail it down now. In addition, our farm management data, we know, was not very granular. It was very top level. So this year we have a farm partners program where we'll be collecting weekly farm practice data, not just asking you, are you till or no till, but actually asking you on a weekly basis, did you till this week in this field? And tell me about the last 2 years of experience in this field. So this is probably the single biggest thing that we're working on this year: increasing the number of samples, improving the quality of the samples, and getting more granular data about each of the samples. We also learned just in compiling this report that we don't have all of the knowledge and skills to even be able to analyze all this data. There's a lot in here, you could analyze it forever. So I really strongly hope that other people in the research community and in the BFA take a look at this data. I hope it's in a form that people can look at. We've tried really hard to clean it up to make it easy to use, but I'm sure people have questions. Feel free to post on the forum. This is a really good time to mention that there is a forum. Go to realfoodcampaign.org/forum. And you can post questions here. Post in the Farm and Data Partners RFC lab. Ask your questions, reference what you've done, talk about what you want to do, everything. Just throw it all here in the forum. We are totally on the forum, and we'll respond. The data partners was key. The lab, the lab processing took a lot of time, but the data partners spent an immense amount of time collecting the data, and their consistency and quality was as important as ours in the lab. This year we're going to be adjusting expectations for data partners so that it fits into a normal person's life. We did ask a ton of our data partners this year, and we're also going to expand the number of data partners, so we're getting it from more locations. In addition, we will have a West Coast lab at Chico State who's partnering with us, so we'll be able to get samples from a wider range of states as well. Shipping, yeah, it's really hard. We need to improve shipping this year. We had some, lost samples or rotten samples, things that showed up in mailboxes that we didn't know, things like that. We lost a lot of samples early also because we were still changing our testing and learning about our testing process as we were collecting real samples. We also made some changes on the fly, which made the data analysis really hard. So this year we are going to really lock everything down by May 1st, the latest, June 1st at the latest, hopefully May 1st, and not change anything throughout the season. It really mucks up the works when you make changes throughout the season on a survey like this. And then finally, this is a ton of work, and we need full-time people and people that are committed and long-term, and so that's something that we've worked at as well. And then finally, just talking about expenses, these are all of the expenses for the year. This is a little old because some of them were estimates at the end, but it's pretty close. When we spec'd this out originally, it was about $500 per sample, a sample being a food sample, and then 2 soil samples. But we were able to do it for about half of that this year, and that was with a lot of lost samples and a lot of learning. This coming year, our projected per sample cost is going to be somewhere between 60 and 116, so 75 to 100. And we won't have the upfront costs for the XRF, which is really the only expensive tool. So I think I really hope that we can show that we can really collect a lot of data broadly and robustly at a pretty low sample cost if we're intentional about selecting the measures for soil and food, so that we're avoiding these big costs. And we also really hope to work closer with universities and other organizations that have equipment that we know that we can't afford and we can't replicate, like GCMS and other types of things, and have them run samples, a subset of samples that we collect, to get, again, more granular, higher quality nutrition data. So that's a hope for this year as well, and we have some potential partners for that. So yeah, that's the run through of the final report. Don't forget, if you want access to the data, you can download the CSV from this link. And if you want to just look at how things seem to relate, you can look at histograms and XY plots of soils to minerals and all kinds of stuff here as well. Feel free to go to the forum. That's realfoodcampaign.org/forum. Post your questions there and thoughts. And yeah, thanks for watching this video. Thank you, Jesus, that we're done. I'm sure we'll make some small updates in the future, but overall we are done. See you next time.